Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I have another really incredible interview for you today. I'm here with James Wilson, who has a bit of a two-pronged story with chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME/CFS. He was severely unwell as a child and recovered, and then again had to face this as an adult. So he has a lot of experience with this and a lot to share. So, hi, James. Thank you so much for doing this today. I'm so excited to hear about this journey of yours.
No, thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited, to have a conversation.
So, where are you in the world for people who are watching?
I'm in London or near enough to London in the UK.
Well, thank you for your time. I know this is a lot to try and cover in just one interview. I was just saying, I'm trying to keep them shorter for people, but it's tough because we're covering a lot of stuff. I guess it makes sense to go back to where this all started for you as a child.
Yeah, I feel like I've got a lot of experience of ME or chronic fatigue syndrome. And it started at a young age for me when I was 9. And I guess at that time I was, a pretty normal, active kid, but I was also a big tennis player and playing tennis for England at the time. So I lived a very high intensity life, I would say, for a 9-year-old probably. And then I kind of started to feel certain symptoms or start to feel unwell as a child. And I think, like a lot of people have experience of, especially, that was just over 20 years ago now. So there wasn't a lot of kind of knowledge about ME or CFS. So it took me a long, long time to get that kind of diagnosis or that understanding of what was wrong, I suppose. So I kind of carried on attempting to kind of live my life at that age as I was, despite how I was feeling. And I ended up kind of crashing quite severely from that. And then, as you say, hard to summarize that whole kind of period, but ended up not walking for maybe 3 years, bedbound for a couple of years. And at my worst, I wasn't eating. I couldn't sit up at all. I remember kind of starting with 1 minute sitting up, so really kind of body really kind of shut down. And, it was obviously a really tough at that age, that's kind of where it all started. And over a kind of long period of time, I kind of rebuilt all the way back up. And by my kind of 14, 15 kind of teenage years, I was back living a kind of full life again. So a lot happened within that, a summary. But
What was it like for you as a child facing such a severe illness?
my memory of it is quite mixed. I remember how tough it was, and I remember some of the really really difficult moments, and when I was at my kind of most severely unwell. But a lot of that time does kind of blur together for me, and I guess some of that is probably the trauma of that and the difficulty of that. And I think it was just my overriding kind of memory was that just sense of like helplessness, from how I was feeling and how physically kind of depleted and unable I was. But also, I guess, as well as at that age, you don't have the kind of autonomy or know what to do about it. And I guess no one could really tell me or tell even my family how to get out of it. That's kind of my overriding kind of memory of the feeling at the time. And obviously, just coming to terms with that complete change and dropping out of school and all those kind of things, as a kind of young person, or very young.
But you did come out of it at least for a few years. So how did that happen?
It's difficult for me to give the real details because a lot of it, because I was so young and so ill, a lot of it was managed by my parents. So I was very lucky that, they were there and they really kind of got me through that and supported me through that. They did eventually find some people that were really helpful in my kind of recovery and my healing. And to be honest, it was a very gradual process of really just incrementally rebuilding my strength and my energy in my body. And as I say, I remember I was literally starting from a place of sitting up for 30 seconds a minute. And, just over time, I really just, step by step rebuilt that. And I guess that's maybe why on reflection, what's slightly different about as a child is I don't remember all of I guess you don't have so much baggage. I don't remember all the undoing of patterns of being and thinking and feeling like I resonate with as an adult. From my memory, it was much more about a physical rebuilding process after so long of being, bedbound and not doing anything. I lost all my muscle mass and all of that kind of stuff. So slow incremental change with a lot of support and learning where my boundaries were, like is always the case as well, and going gently with it, I suppose.
And then what happened from there?
From there, as I say, from when I was maybe 14, I was kind of went straight back into school. Lucky again, school kind of took me back in my same year that I was in before with my friends. So I kind of was able to slot back in, and then got back into playing tennis, playing sport, went to university. You lived a complete, healthy, happy life. And then kind of left university, started working in London, living in London. And then it was my kind of mid-20s when I was 25 that I started running into some trouble again. And yeah, I think like a lot of people, I probably had a bit of a perfect storm of things, and definitely living life in a high stress, unsustainable way, I would say, on reflection. Yeah, I was working long hours in my job, which was a very kind of stressful, fast-paced job. My coping mechanisms with that were exercising excessively, going to the gym, going out on the weekends. I wasn't particularly happy in my kind of living flat share that I was in. Got really bad flu, combination of things, I think. And yeah, and then I kind of, I think I've learnt now my body's pretty good at stopping me when it wants to.
So when you did start noticing symptoms again, did you immediately connect it to your childhood experience?
Yeah, quite quickly, because I started sort of noticing different sensations or symptoms, and, particularly noticing things like I'd go and play, I remember one time particularly going out and playing 2 hours of tennis and pushing myself really hard and, just feeling absolutely horrendous, afterwards, and lots of little things over a period of a couple of months where I was like, all the same things that I recognized from the feelings from before, and a lot of the same symptoms as well, to be honest. Then I kind of was able to self-diagnose pretty quickly. So yeah, I kind of didn't do the merry-go-round of trying to, luckily work out what was going on second time around, because I had a pretty good understanding, I think, already.
That sounds like it would be terrifying to see that coming back again. What were you thinking when this all started happening again?
That was definitely the hardest bit to begin with, was the fear, because my only experience of it was so severe as a child, and my mind was obviously instantly going to like, oh my God, am I going to end up back where I was, and that severely ill? And yeah, there was a huge amount of that kind of fear going on at first, and questioning whether that was in my control. That was, I remember, something I was grappling with. I was like, does it just like, how much of this is like based on how I manage this now and respond to this versus like what just happens? Because it was so fast when I was a child as well. It just ended up like bam before I knew it. So yeah, a lot of fear at that time and kind of questioning what would happen. But on the flip side, because of my experience, I was able to know pretty quickly, okay, well, I need to simmer off here a bit. I need to stop exercising like that. I need to rebalance a little bit. And I didn't completely, but I did definitely know that it wasn't the time to keep going and to keep trying to exercise in the way I was and all that kind of stuff. And I stripped right back down, partly because of how I was feeling, but also partly because I knew that wasn't the answer.
How did you handle it? I have so many questions. I can't even imagine what this was like, having been through it already. I have so many questions in my head. I'm just trying to think of that feeling of it having gone through something so terrible, and then to be seeing it come back as an adult, but then not really knowing or remembering even kind of what got you fully out of it in the first place. So how did you approach it this second time? What were your thoughts about recovery or getting past this?
Well, I kind of defaulted back to what worked for me the first time. And interestingly, it's not what's worked for me this time. But my instinct was like, okay, well, as a child, I kind of really went down the kind of incremental changes, really, I guess, more of a like traditional pacing kind of route, right? And gradual incremental changes. And that is what the kind of, I don't know if it's changed at all now, but the kind of National Health Service route is in the UK at the moment as well, is going down that. You have some CBT, but also some sort of graded exercise and pacing alongside it. So that was kind of my default to start with. Okay, that worked for me when I was younger, so let's try and do that now. Yeah, as I say, it didn't end up being that effective for me, but it was also, I was still working full time at that point. So in that same job and in those same environments. So trying to live a different way while still dealing with those pressures and those expectations didn't work, unsurprisingly. So yeah, I mean, I could go through the whole process, but I ended up going down to part-time at work and then eventually quitting my job because that wasn't sustainable. And then ended up going on a completely, as everyone I think does, winding path through different approaches and healing modalities and things, exploring different things that might help me along the way.
I'd be really curious to hear about what some of the things were that you did try.
I tried sort of pacing. I tried the NHS, I said, CBT and graded exercise therapy. That really didn't work for me, I think, on the level that I felt like I was trying to increase what I was doing, but without any actual changes happening to like my nervous system or my body. I was just trying to increase from the same place of being in a bad state, if that makes sense. So that didn't kind of work for me at the time. And then, I tried all sorts of kind of more holistic health stuff, diet changes, your kind of supplements, your CBD, acupuncture, different types of therapy, kind of you name it. I then went on a long process of brain retraining. I've done a huge amount of different brain retraining and different brain retraining programs, meditation, breath work, somatic stuff. I've done all sorts of things. And I feel like now I've kind of found my recipe of what really resonates with me and what I think is really works. But it's taken a lot of experimentation, a lot of time, as I think so many people will probably be able to resonate with. It's sort of like a big jigsaw puzzle as you go through it.
Very much is. It is absolutely. Someone I interviewed on this channel called it, and she has a channel called The Puzzle of Healing. And I think that's the most perfect term for it, because it really is just very few of us have the same experience, have the same path out of this. And there are little pieces that help everything fall into place. So I'm very curious, one, about how long it took you to find your perfect recipe. And then, of course, two, what that ended up being.
Well, it's since that time we're talking about when I first started feeling unwell as an adult. That's where are we now? It's over 4 years ago now. So it's taken me pretty much all of that time. And although I say I've kind of found the things that work for me, I also don't claim to have perfected the puzzle, so to speak. And, I'm still exploring things day to day and changing things up. And, I think I see it as an ongoing thing to prioritize my health and well-being and find different ways to help myself feel better and enjoy my life more. But I think there's some fundamentals that I've kind of landed on that kind of work for me. One of which is just simply around the nervous system, and it took me a long time to even stumble across what that even is. But now I have a much better understanding of it, and the way that I kind of have learned to use both kind of nourish my mind and my body to be able to, I guess, simply put myself in a healing physical state as much as I can. So less about, particular tools, but actually how can I just get myself to a place where my body is going to do the healing work for me and be back in that place of kind of regulation and balance. And some of that has been brain retraining as a part of that. Some of that has been more body-based stuff. I'm a big fan of the breath and breath work. I use my breath a huge amount every day. A lot of it has just been undoing a lifetime of patterns of being and behaving and doing things. A lifetime of probably, being an achiever and wanting to do more and push and perfect things and not being good at relaxing and all of that kind of stuff that I guess I've worked to undo in many respects. And then I guess there's some more softer stuff as well. I think vulnerability has been a big thing for me in the latter part of my healing. No longer pretending I'm somewhere that I'm not, no longer searching and reaching for this place of kind of perfection or perfect health, and being really open and honest about where I'm at and my experience. And I think that's really helped, because I think the hardest thing for me about chronic illness is feeling not understood. And that disconnect between how someone feels in themselves and their experience and the perception from the outside, and the difference between those is I think hugely stressful and hard. So for me, vulnerability has been a way to really bridge that gap, and I think that's been hugely helpful. Food a little bit, diet, it hasn't been crucial for me, but it's been an element. Routine and structure has really helped me. Yeah, there's been so much, and I think there's the overall umbrella I feel of just the nervous system stuff, but within that there's so many different little bits and pieces that have kind of helped along the way, and that have just kind of built up to to improvements, really, I suppose.
I know there's a lot in there, and I don't want to, zero in on anything as the main single thing that has helped the most, but I get a lot of questions about brain training programs, and having never done any myself, it's a tough one for me to answer. So could you share anything about any of the programs that you did or anything that you found helpful?
I mean, I've done lots of programs. I've done DNRS, which is obviously a big one. I've done the lightning process. I've done Kathleen King's one, and I've kind of dabbled in a few other shorter practices and bits and pieces as well. And they all have a lot of similarities and some differences as well. And I found it really useful because I guess brain retraining is just really understanding some of those patterns that we have within our brain and within our mind that are generating fear within us, and therefore, putting us in a physiological state which isn't helpful for our healing. I mean, that's a kind of simplified version of what it is, but I certainly found a lot of them helpful. I also think there's a lot of things that I would like to see done differently in the brain retraining space, which is one thing I'm trying to kind of work on as well, because I think a lot of the programs can be really prescriptive in terms of like, this is the way to do it, and this is how to do it, and this is how long you should do it for. And there's a lot of shoulds in there. And the way I ended up making brain retraining really work for me was moving away from that to it being really flexible and personal, and being much more kind and compassionate to myself about it, and less a really rigid process, but actually like, what do I need and what feels good to me and what is fun? Because I think with all these things, and brain retraining included, if it becomes a chore, you've kind of lost already in many respects, because it's all about reducing that stress and reducing that burden on you. And so the more fun and flexible and intuitive it can be, I think, the better. So it's a bit of a mixed answer, but I think brain retraining can be hugely powerful. I do it, I teach it, but I really would love to see it or in a more kind and flexible and compassionate way in a lot of cases.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because although brain training wasn't officially part of my recovery, now I've since talked to so many people who have used it, and people who have explained to me, off camera, kind of the process of the different programs, and just shared a bit of it. And, in my own life, if I feel like there's any hint of anything coming back, and I'm still never quite sure, because sometimes I'm just really run down and I push myself hard, but I always feel like no one system that anyone explains to me completely resonates. So I just pull out little pieces of all of them and do it in a more kind of flexible way. So if I ever have any feeling like my body might be putting the brakes on and trying to shut me down, then I find something that kind of fits more for me. So yeah, it's just interesting to hear you share that experience.
I really think that should really be encouraged. And I think it's only natural that whoever produces these programs and these trainings, they obviously feel really passionately about the way that they're teaching and their approach, and that it works, and therefore they want to encourage it in the most authentic way to them. And so it's not a reflection on them necessarily and what they're putting out there. I think it's just, as you say, understanding that everyone is unique in the way that they learn and the way that they implement, and their home life and things they've got going on. And I think, healing just is different for everyone, and you can take those fundamentals and really make it your own, as you kind of have talked about, obviously doing yourself as well.
Yeah, I just think to myself, because this is all relatively new, I don't think we have any people who have 100% figured out the brain, and it's not like something that we've been practicing for thousands of years. So I just think, these are different approaches that people have found that have worked for some people. So that does leave open the possibility that there could be another approach that could also work. And we do notice with CFS that individualizing treatment does really help. So yeah, this also, we talked a bit about off camera about this, and I think it's a really good thing to talk about here, the concept of full recovery, because you don't, when I asked, I said, should I introduce you as fully recovered? And you said, that's not a title that it's not something that I embrace or use in my life. And I was so glad that you brought that up, because it's a challenging thing for me as well, because yes, I consider myself fully recovered, but it's I think it's a inaccurate way to think about health, because I still struggle and I still have days when I'm exhausted, and every little thing I'm always a bit nervous about. Like, I posted one day on Instagram that I took a nap, and I got all these messages like, is your CFS back? And I have some of that thinking in my own head too. Like, I had to take a nap. Am I sick again? But it's just, health is always kind of fluctuating a bit. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, about this whole concept of full recovery.
And that's actually is something I forgot to mention when you asked what kind of worked for me, because funnily enough, this is kind of one of the things that has worked for me, is kind of letting go of that label and that kind of idea of, being totally healed or totally recovered, because I think I certainly have a tendency within me to want to like progress and achieve and get to that place and compare to other people who are healed or fully recovered. And it kind of leaves me constantly searching or pushing or feeling like where I am isn't okay, which I know for me is not helpful. And in my own life, certainly, I've started to move away from that idea. And actually, for me, it's more a case of, okay, as you say, I'm doing everything I can to maximize my life, basically, maximize how I feel, maximize my well-being, maximize my enjoyment of life. That looks a little bit different every day. Some days I feel great. Some days I don't feel so good. Is that ME/CFS? Is it not? I don't know. Half the time, it's really fluid. And for me, going with that and not having that kind of really black or white kind of ill, healthy, sick, healed kind of label really helps me, and helps me kind of just be a lot more kind and compassionate to myself. And I think, because I'm really familiar with those kind of things in your mind that you're talking about, when you feel certain things, it's like, oh my God, am I sick again? Am I not healed anymore? And that kind of all kind of melts away a little bit when it's like, well, I haven't attached anything to this anyway. So I'm just feeling this way today, and that's okay. I've got these things that I can draw upon maybe to make me feel better, or maybe I'm just having one of those days and that's fine, So I think it's been really helpful for me to do that. And I think what's been interesting is part of that vulnerability I talked about has been doing that as well, because I think for me now, kind of working in this space as well, and like making it my mission to help other people, I for a long time felt really scared to be open that I wasn't feeling perfect all the time myself. And it took a lot for me to then actually just be totally vulnerable like I am now and just be open with that. But I think I'm connected with so many people because of that, who feel so relieved, because they're like, oh, like me too, like I may have recovered or healed, but I still have days where I feel like that. And it's such a relief that like I don't need to be that perfect picture of health. So I think there's something there. And yeah, just for me personally, it's really worked to not think about it in that way, as I guess you wouldn't with many other things in life. No one's ever healed in all areas of their life, and no one feels perfect. So
yeah, and nobody fully understands this illness. So, I like to consider myself recovered. I don't think anyone on the planet can say whether it is or isn't going to come back, or if it's actually gone. And I'm so glad that you brought this up. Like you said, I think this will resonate for a lot of people. And I have a lot of conversations as well with people who consider themselves fully recovered. And as soon as one of us broaches the topic or sort of makes it okay to start talking about like, oh, I had a bad day or bad week the other week, and then I got really scared. Is it back? And then I thought, am I a fraud? I've gone out publicly saying I'm fully, like, there's just all this pressure and all these layers of confusion. And I'm continually having to relearn even what it means to be healthy, because I really do have this picture in my head that being healthy again means that you never feel unwell again. But that's just not realistic. That's just not how the human body is. Like, you're going to be tired. You're going to have bad days.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of what chronic fatigue or ME does to you as well is help you to redefine what like normal is as well. Because I think a lot of people who experience it are really proactive, high achieving, determined people who probably to start with had a incredibly full life, so to speak, like I resonate with having before. And it isn't necessarily that the life they're living now is wrong or not full. It's just more in a more balanced way, and that's different from what maybe a lot of the people are used to as well. And I think it's often I try to not compare myself to what I what I was before, but actually just what balance in my day, what lifestyle actually serves me now and moving forward. And if I'd looked at that 6 years ago, I would have gone, well, that's, you're not doing that much. But now I know that that's what I need in my life to be sustainable, is to have like much more rest built in, much more space, much more flexibility, much more kindness to myself, much more slow movement rather than, killing myself. I think it is a kind of, everything is relative as well.
I'm laughing because so many of us say that this is what we're trying to achieve, to get back to where we were. But back to where we were, for most of us, we recognize, at least for some of us, is part of the reason we ended up where we were. So trying to get back to that lifestyle is really not a good idea. And that's such a good point, that anything that falls short of that is less, which is probably what we need, feels like, oh, maybe I'm not fully back because I can't do what I was doing before. But that was such an insane amount of activity that it's a recipe for disaster.
And I think that's why kind of this whole journey makes you completely rethink your identity as well. And like, who actually am I and what's important to me? Because I think certainly for me in the past, my identity was really based on all things that I did. Like it was based on like how good I was at sport, or like how, much I did at my job, or, all these things are actually just based on like things I did or how much I did, not really on anything based on like my personality or who I am. And so I think a lot of it is identity based. You lose all of that. When you lose all the things you can do, it's like, well, like, who am I anymore, And I think it's that rebuilding that's kind of helped me realize that I don't want to go back to that, but I actually want to go forward with with the learnings of actually what's kind of important to me now, which is less than maybe like less activity than maybe before, but a lot more kind of like depth and variety, I suppose.
Which is, I don't know about your experience, but I find way easier said than done, because when I recovered, I put myself in sort of this bubble, and I was just all about self-care, and everything was about getting well. And at the end of it, you've had this feeling like I will never go back to that person that I was before, and I've learned a new way, and I'm going to live a new life. But that's very easy to say when you don't have all the demands of life back in your life yet. But once you start working again, I found it very easy to fall back into old patterns and old habits. It's a challenging thing to really break. I think like recovery, just with this, it's not linear. We have little relapses and we fall back into some old patterns, and then we catch ourselves, and then we come back up again. How's your experience been with transforming the way you approach your life?
Yeah, as you say, it's not easy, and it is like a daily reminder to like be aware of those patterns and those tendencies and to be conscious of them. And it's kind of bittersweet having a body that is, for me, like communicates so well, because on the one hand, it's been quite annoying, so to speak, in my life. But also it helps keep me kind of on track with that and remind me when I'm doing things, that aren't maybe aligned with what I need to be doing. I think it's helped for me, like now deciding to work for myself and not going back to a job, because it means that I can now manage my own time, which I think has been powerful for me, because I think I have the people pleaser in me, that when someone asks me to do something, I'm going to do it, which is what I would do in my old job. Whereas now I don't have that. I have it with myself, but I don't have that to deal with. So I'm kind of able to balance in a different kind of way. But as you say, a constant kind of battle to keep conscious of those things and those patterns, and to kind of live life in the way that serves me best. And balancing that kind of, you talked about that constant healing work with just living as well, which is, I think, always a challenging balance to get right, not getting too caught up in the work, not to have, a bit of fun as well.
I'm curious as well, having been through everything that you've been through with your health, what gaps have you seen in the process, or, what's missing? What do we need for this to be better able to support people?
Well, I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit for me. And I think what I found the biggest challenge, and maybe the thing that held me back for the longest, was all the work I was doing on brain retraining and other programs was really kind of tapping into that personality trait of me to like want to do things right, and I must do it in this way, and I must do it for this long, and I must work harder at this. and I must keep going and I must push myself. I almost applied all of that to those programs, some of which I did, which were quite prescriptive. So the kind of shift I really want to like encourage through my work is kind of making this whole space a lot more, as you've talked about, kind of intuitive, personal, kind, compassionate. That idea of the jigsaw, like it's not the same for everyone, and that's okay. And it's about piecing all of that together with the tools that are out there and really making it your own. And I think there is no one way to do this, you know. I think there's some big themes that we kind of talked about that we're seeing a lot that are helping a huge amount of people. But yeah, I really want to help people to kind of embrace all of that work in a much more compassionate way to themselves that doesn't feel like a real chore, I suppose. Because that's what it felt like for me for a long, long time, is like a real chore.
So I know you have some stuff available now for people who are facing conditions like this and some things coming up in the future. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I have a brain retraining kind of masterclass out there that's free, which is kind of, as we talked about, taking, I guess, my own kind of approach to brain retraining, but in a really like kind and compassionate and flexible way, in the kind of way that I kind of wish, I suppose, that I had interpreted the programs that I did to begin with. I'm also building a nervous system 6-week course, which will be out in the summer, which is all going to be about understanding your kind of individual nervous system a lot more deeply. We're going to do some brain retraining within that, but also quite a lot of breath work and inner child healing, and really kind of undoing all those kind of patterns that I've talked about as well, which I think are really common in the kind of chronic illness community. So that's going to be coming out in the summer, which I've been tweaking away at for a long, long time now. It's kind of been 9 months in the making. So I'm really looking forward to finally kind of having that out there in the world, as well as kind of I do a lot of kind of free content on my social media and bits and pieces, as well as some one-to-one work as well. But yeah, I guess I'm really kind of want to empower people kind of on their healing path, but in a really kind of a way that they feel like really seen and understood, which I really didn't feel for a lot of my journey, and have that kind of kindness and compassion with it as well.
Excellent. And we'll, of course, make sure to have all of this linked in this video description. So if you want to find out where to follow James on social media or learn about any of the support that he has available, that will all be there. And I definitely encourage you to check it out. So just as we wrap up, as always, I really love hearing what people have to say. I'd love to hear what you have to say to people who are watching, who are still in this, who are still struggling. What thoughts or advice would you have for them?
Yeah, wow. Well, it's a hard one to summarize, isn't it? But I think the first thing is, I think, kind of just to acknowledge like how like tough this experience is and how hard it is. And, you know, like I've certainly been through nothing else in my life that comes close to how tough it is and how isolating it can be. And I think it tests you on every different level possible, you know. So I think it's just starting from that place of like, yeah, like amazing to just be getting through that and to be dealing with that. And I think as well, just, you know, I talked a lot about things that have worked for me and things that haven't worked, but I think there's nothing really that hasn't worked, in that everything you try that doesn't work is getting you closer to what will help you. And it doesn't feel like that at the time, but, you know, I wouldn't change any of the things that I've done and spent money on or spent time on or whatever, because they've all got me closer to what has really kind of helped me as well. So I know how frustrating it can be to keep doing things and being like, when am I, you know, I'm not getting anywhere, but it does happen. And yeah, just kind of trusting yourself and just honor where you're at. I think kind of tying in some of those themes that we talked about, you know, where you're at is okay wherever you are. Just, you know, doing the work you're doing, I'm sure, and getting through that is enough. And, you know, we will all find our way in some capacity to a fuller life. And the only final thing I'd say is there has become a point for me now where, despite all of that kind of suffering that I've talked about, like I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change any of it. Like I'm actually, you know, grateful for it. Yes, horrible at times. Yes, difficult. But like all the changes that I've been, you know, forced to make through it, I know are going to kind of result in a far happier life for me in the future. And I know myself so much better, and I know how to get the best from everything in my life in a way that I would have never have done before. So, you know, there will come a point, I think, for everyone where they are grateful for the experience. And I think it's it's rubbish, but it's also a gift.
Thank you so much, James. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and thank you to all of you who are watching. Whatever you're facing, I know it can be tough. I just am sending so much love out to you and hugs. Hang in there. Good for you for watching videos like this and looking for new tools to add to your journey. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm sure James and myself, I am of course happy to answer them in the video comments, and his contact information will be in the video description as well. And yeah, that's it for today. Thank you again, James. Thank you everyone who's watching, and I'll see you in the next video.